Thanks for chatting with us today. And I think I'd like to start out learning about what got you started in making these jazz paintings. Tell us about your body of work.
Okay. In short, what got me into it was 10 years ago, actually this month, August, so 2012. A friend of mine asked me to come and paint to his live thing at Multiculti in Chicago. And the drummer was a little reluctant because he'd had people do it before, and they kind of just did what they did in the studio. And there wasn't anything particular about the music. So but for me, I have a friend, his name is Jeff Schlanger. He goes by the Music Witness, and he comes out of New York City, Westchester, New Rochelle. And he's been doing music, he's been doing painting to music since the late 50s, 60s. So this is a friend of mine that I knew that was very good at this, and it was his particular style. And so I kind of felt like it was his territory. So, and I hadn't done it before, so I really did. I called up Jeff and I said, Jeff, I have a friend who wants me to do this in Chicago. How would you feel about me doing that? Because it's his territory. And he said, Lou, I haven't been to Chicago probably since the 70s. Go ahead and do your thing. But I needed his blessing because even though it's a very universal thing, I would pretty much be doing Jeff's gig in Chicago. So he said, yes, I did it. The band reacted very well. And the drummer said, oh, hey man, you paint like I play. I was like, oh, okay.
Beautiful.
And personally, I really felt like I was getting into something. There was sort of like a spine tingling, like a churchy temple sort of feeling like, hey, I'm in a place, a little bit like a sacred feeling in a weird way. But and here I was in a funky club in Chicago. So that really got me wanting to do it more. The band's response got me more into it. And so then it was like a fix. Like all of a sudden it was like, okay, what all artists are really looking for is, I think, purpose and respect. And I started to get a little bit of those both while I was doing live painting to live music. And so even though I did have a day job painting, like regular stuff, decorative painting, stuff like that, in the evenings I would gig. I would find ones that said yes, And it was real important for me early on to get permission to talk to the musicians and the venue too, because I know, I didn't want to just show up and be that guy. Plus I could bring a canvas. So that worked out. I just kept doing that. And again, this is 10 years ago, and man, here we are.
And you've been painting all over Chicagoland since.
Yeah, it's Chicagoland. It's taken me to New York. Jazz Institute had me go to Poland and Poznan for the festival there. I think it was the last one they did. It was the Jazz in Chicago series that's been going on there for, I think, like 15 years, maybe 13. So she brought me into that. Lauren Deutsch did that. Well, the performance part, I guess there's a part of a recognizing your ego and then trying to purge that ego at the same time, meaning like you're performing, even though my back is oftentimes to the audience. It was also me taking the process out of the studio and sharing it in a public way, which in a lot of ways is you're exposing yourself. You're kind of being vulnerable, like that sense. But I thought it was important. So it got me out of the studio. I'd treat the venue like a job site for that evening. So I'd set up and break down, if that makes any sense. But it really was like, okay, I'm as vulnerable as the band is, Not all artists really want to do a public thing, but in a lot of ways, if you're collaborating, the only way to really do that is to do it out. And I think musicians would say that especially, where if you're working on something, you can do it, you can practice all you want, but sort of doing it in front of a live audience, you get the feedback. I would think it's the same thing as a comedian, you can talk to the mirror all as much as you want, but you don't really know if it's funny unless you do it out there. And so that was kind of part of the, getting the response from the audience and the musicians. It just seemed to work.
Well, I love the blend between the different art forms. That's one of the reasons we invited you to come here, because of it's adding layers of arts on each other, and it's starting to merge the differences between or the borders between the different media. From your biography, you call yourself an absurdist painter? Is that what I saw? Can you explain that for me?
Okay, sure. I like the term. As a language person, I like the term absurdist because I think it's absurd what I do. Meaning, if my job is to capture music, that's not something you can see, Like I'm trying to do something that is not really a job and it's not really there. And I'm using my imagination to pretend that the music is there. So that's all happening up here. It's sort of like as ridiculous as trying to reach for a balloon once it's left your hand. That's sort of like it goes, and that notion of but I like the feeling of that you want it, but you can't have it while you're being so silly. But there's also I just feel like I'm doing something very kind of ridiculous, but I've turned it into a discipline, and that's kind of absurd.
I understand.
Surreal too.
Yeah. And you're trying to capture ephemeral moments and and what's happening there on that specific day, night with these performers.
Sure.
Tell me about how that creeps into your paintings and how it affects each piece.
Yeah, there's an urgency in it because as soon as the music is done, the painting is done, but also the music's only going to be there for so long. A set can be 20 minutes, a set can be an hour and a half, and it's my job is to document it fully, to make it real, and that's more important than making a pretty picture, is to be genuine and real in the moment. So it's like a photographer in that sense of it being a document and being there. But knowing that it's, once the last tone is there and the music stops, I like to think that the vibrations are just fading away. And if you think about it in the big picture, if there's an open window, the sound is sort of going as far as it can go until the human ear can't hear it. And so I have that little bit of glow left to finish up the piece. It's also about like listening and thinking like, okay, this is gonna be the last song. But I like that urgency, and Julie, that also brings me to what was tied into the urgency of it was, man, this is so fantastic. I hope this never goes away. But I know with the way culture moves along, at a certain point, either live music won't be popular, or what I do won't be popular, or it'll just go away. I was like, well, that's going to happen probably not in my lifetime. And then the blip, our pandemic blip happened. And all of a sudden it was real, the urgency of today you can go out and paint Greg Ward, and the next day, guess what? All the things that you had planned for the summer, for what it was, April, were gone. And the curtain fell, and it was like, here it is, in real time, in my lifetime. The urgency is real, because at that time, we didn't know when it was going to come back. It could have been months, it could have been years, it could end up being a year and a half. We don't know if it's going to happen again. So that's also this is precious, being able to be alive, conscious of that fact, and create something in real time is a precious, precious thing.
And your paintings are precious. We really can feel each one is so distinct. You really get a sense of, like you said, the atmosphere in the room. We get a sense of rhythm. We get a sense of the theatrical lighting, and then the performers often, there's I don't know how to describe it. They're rendered. Well, they're not rendered. They're suggested in every painting, but there's so much movement happening. It's almost an animation. Where does that come from?
you say animation, it definitely comes from animation. That's part of my background in New York City, working for Michael Sporn Animation right out of college, right there on Bleecker Street and Broadway. And I worked for Michael for a good 5-6 years. And it was the old school animation. So I was doing a little bit of everything. So it was exposure sheets, it was in-betweening, it was keyframe stuff. And so my head was very much focused on key poses, how to make something move with simple drawings. But also there's a bit of a God complex in animation where you're creating something that's not alive. And then when you put it through the process, all of a sudden it's alive,
So we chatted yesterday, and I asked you what kind of paint you're using, because there's like multiple layers in your pieces, which kind of goes back to the animation feeling, the multiple cell, the layering of all the different cells. Tell us about your paint.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely one of the fun parts about doing it out also is sharing the process. And for me, it's not only not being afraid of small surfaces to really, really big surfaces, but it's also not being afraid of all kinds of different paints and materials, right? And so as like a house painter, I'm used to using a gallon or 5 gallons, that's where the pigment is and stuff like that. So I mix my own paints when I can. I get like Benjamin Moore tints in the big things and mix my own stuff. I like to be in control of that. I use a lot of glazes. In particular, I use the Ben Moore glaze. And I just found out today, Julie, that I went to the store to get some, and apparently they're discontinuing it, which is like, I don't know if you're an artist and you have a thing that you found that really works.
Yes.
A paper or a pen, and they're like, yeah, we're not going to make that anymore.
That's traumatic.
I'm just like, dude. So then this is me scrambling to find out where's the gallon of glaze over here, studio glaze. So that's happening today. But I use that because I like I don't know what's the word, the viscosity of it, the way that it keeps acrylic wet. And again, I'm sorry, I should start with that. I don't use oils. It's all water-based acrylics. That's mostly because I like it. It dries quickly. It doesn't stink.
Yeah.
You can't really do oils in a venue. You can't go to a museum and start stinking the place up, even though technically a museum is filled with stinky paintings. You like to think that they've been cured so they're not stinky.
Yeah, well, if they're nice and old, you don't smell
right,
anything.
Right.
Yeah.
As much as I love the smell of linseed oil, almost like, dab here and dab here, just walk around because it's like art school. This is all acrylic stuff. And, we're talking about layers before, sort of like take the painting and turn it this way, right? I do layers of music, often layers of representation, and more layers of music. And often in between those layers is me doing a layer of glaze to sort of like moisten it up a little bit, sort of get that wetness. And then the brush strokes of the acrylic kind of can mimic oil in some ways, or if you just go dry, you only get so far. But if it's got a layer of glaze, then I can really take that, do a lyrical brush stroke thing going on. One of the things I really like about that I use for sometimes low notes, but mostly when I need a top note, again, here's the layers, a top note for a painting. I use a lot of screen printing inks. And these screen printing inks can really, if I put them on thick enough, try to see there's an example. If you put it on thick enough, it really just stay there. And there's a little bit of opacity, but it's nice and fat and thick. And it also can turn into something else when it hits the glaze and stuff like that. And again, that's something else that I did for years, also in New York City, was print T-shirts. So those in front of the hot machines, just like cranking out T-shirts and laying them down, and that was the sweaty part of it. The other fun part was the separating the colors and burning the screens and stuff like that. It was always pushing ink through the screens. In a similar way, like going back to animation, when we're doing cells, ink on cells, you're pushing, we call pushing the bead. So you sort of have a bead of something in there that you're pushing to the edge of where it's supposed to be, making sure it doesn't go past, pulling it somewhere else. It's all about controlling what you're doing. And so all that comes into process when I'm doing the live music stuff. It's all about listening, of course. We can talk about that if you want. But it's also like bringing my experience and my life experience and what I've been doing into the moment, which is all that stuff.
Well, I think that's so wonderful. I think your media that you're using, you're familiar with it, and it's out of the box. A lot of the people who are listening to this, they're used to going to the art supply store and picking up the oil paint or the alkyd or the acrylic or watercolor, and they're really pure about it. But you, I mean, when you're an artist, you'll just grab anything that's available or what you know well and go. So that's fantastic. Yeah, tell me about how you work with sound. How do you listen, and how does that go onto the canvas?
Yeah, that was, I've always been a big fan of music. Sort of come from music teachers are in my family. And I just never decided, I don't know, forever. And art was just there for me. So I felt like, well, I didn't need to play the trumpet because my sister plays the trumpet. Or I didn't need to play the drums because my cousin played the drums, And I'm glad I put that aside, because while I'm painting and listening intently, I'm not tethered by, oh, why are they playing it like that? Or that's a different note than they were doing in practice and stuff like that. Or what's actually happening on the saxophone. It's all just circles and squares and shapes and colors and forms. So I can paint like a child in that sense and not have to worry about what's going on musically. And I can really enjoy it. The music is just as important as the silence is. Going back to just in life, it's important to listen. But like you can't have a conversation if you're just talking. There's beats. There's a lot of time where you are just quiet and you're listening to what's going on. I really can't go to a show, or I prefer not to go to a show, and just not paint. My brain is now kind of wired over the last 10 years to respond. Whether it's on a digital iPad, or whether it's sketching in my lab, or whether it's sort of working on a canvas. Especially with creative music and some of the stuff that might be more challenging to the ear or extra enjoyable to the ear. When I'm painting, it helps me to, I'm going to try to say this word without stuttering, compartmentalize. Is that the right? Anyway, I'm saying, like, put them in compartments of like, okay, I'm hearing that. And while I'm painting, my brain goes, I heard that. Did you hear that? And there's sort of like an inner dialogue of like, if I stop and then I'm looking up, all of a sudden a wave of sound comes at me that is a little more like, okay, this is almost, it's either too much, it's not as exciting, or it's just different. And I can see why if you're not a fan of, say, creative music, and you come into a room and everybody's playing, or there's that slow build and bringing you to an outer space place, you might be like, yeah, this isn't for me. For me, it's very much for me, because not only am I taking the ride, but sometimes it's just about like, wow, that sweet sound the piano player just made in between what the bass and the drums is doing. Did everybody else hear that like I heard that? Like that was like, like a really tasty little piece there.
Yeah,
and that brings me back,
Your appreciation of music must just be, you must have just such a rich experience because you're using all parts of your brain.
It's sort of heightened, yeah, and that's plus it's a great job that I get to do. So it's my job, like, okay, you're supposed to interpret your emotional connection to what's actually happening right now. Like, make it real, don't fake it, dude. Plus everybody's watching you.
Right.
It can happen if I'm doing like jazz occurrence things. Like, plus you're on the line, just like the band is. There's a rush to that, There's sort of a.
I'm curious, does the audience disappear for you at any point, or are you always aware of them watching?
That happens all the time, Joe.
Okay.
And I like that sometimes, because I don't like to think that there's 100 people behind me, either paying attention to me or the band. especially if I'm next to the band, and they are, it's very much, sometimes if you start the gig, there's often times where you're just like, okay, there's a couple people trickling in, that's great, and you start doing your thing, and then you turn around in the end with the applause stuff, and the room is filled with people, and it's like, okay, I wasn't totally aware of that, but that's cool.
You're instantly back.
I have a childhood story about playing Santa Claus on stage and crying, but I won't go into that, but.
Well, Louis, I'm so excited about your show and for all of our visitors in the gallery to see your work and learn about your work. And I think this video is going to help a lot of people really appreciate what they're looking at. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.